Hey guys, this is a video analysis on Romeo and Juliet Act 1. I'll offer some summaries of each scene and some analysis and some different insights. So the first thing I want to look at is some essential questions which connect to different themes that we can talk about while we're reading Romeo and Juliet. And I think everybody knows that love is a key idea, a theme in the play. And we can ask ourselves, what is true love? What should one sacrifice for true love? What should one never sacrifice for true love? And ultimately, is the love between Romeo and Juliet true love? You'll find out that in Act 1, Romeo's in love with a girl named Rosaline. He's not even in love with Juliet. He doesn't meet her until the final scene of Act 1. That always shocks a lot of my students each year when they're reading the play because they don't hear about Rosaline, but they know about Romeo and Juliet. They often know there's a feud between the families, and they also often know that they'll die at the end. So there's a lot of interesting questions we can ask about this, and it's a very human question. And we as people every day need to decide what is necessary to do for love or to sacrifice or not to. Fate is another big concept that is covered in this play. Questions we can ask is fate real? Is there such a thing? And if so, can a person avoid his or her fate? Is fate alone responsible in this play for the deaths of Romeo and Juliet, or should certain characters be held responsible? If you don't know what fate is, that's basically destiny, or the idea that things are predetermined. The prologue of this play makes it feel like, yeah, Romeo and Juliet were destined to die, but we could ask ourselves, do they make decisions that basically impact that, or could anything have been avoided? We can also ask, what role does family play in a person's identity? Family is a big, component of this play. The relationships that Romeo and Juliet have with their parents definitely helps to determine some of the outcomes. And I think it's so modern because we can ask ourselves today, what role does a parent play, and how can the way that parents interact with their kids help them or harm them? Likewise, how can withholding information from your family hurt or harm you? And finally, for Act 1, we'll look at this with Romeo in particular, but how can an author use language to establish or define a character? What kinds of linguistic structures distinguish Shakespeare's different characters in the play? And we'll look at how when Romeo's in love, he starts speaking in couplets and he's very poetic. And there's more to that, but we'll at least look at that for this act. So when we look at Act 1, Scene 1, here's a summary. There are there's multiple servants of two families, the Capulets and Montagues, and they start a fight in the streets of Verona, Italy. There's a moment where they're biting their thumbs at each other. That's the modern equivalent of giving somebody the middle finger, basically. And they say nasty things about each other. Then Benvolio, who is a Montague, he tries to stop it, but Tybalt, who is a Capulet, he incites more violence and he fights Benvolio. Benvolio and Tybalt, they are foils. Benvolio is peaceful. Tybalt is very violent. He wants to fight. Lord and Lady Capulet and Lord and Lady Montague, these are the parents of, respectively, Juliet and Romeo. They arrive and they join in. And Lord Capulet asks his wife for a sword. And she says, a crutch, a crutch. Why call you for a sword? Which is a nice burn. She's calling him old. The prince arrives as the Prince of Verona. Think of him as like the, like a chief deputy or something like that. Police deputy, I meant. And anyway, he arrives. He breaks up the fight. He tells both families that if a civil brawl erupts again, their lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace. So he's threatening them with death, basically, if they don't, if they don't stop this. Finally, Montague asks Benvolio, who is his nephew, which is Romeo's cousin, he asks, why is Romeo so sad? Benvolio says that he'll find out, and he finds Romeo, and he discovers that Romeo is heartbroken. There's a girl that he loves named Rosaline who does not love him back. Rosaline has kind of vowed to be like a nun, and I don't want to be inappropriate, but in a lot of senses, she's vowed to be chaste. She's taken a vow of chastity, so there's something that she will not do that makes Romeo upset. So we could even question right here, does Romeo really love this girl, or is he just a teenager, wanting something that he can't have? In Act 1, Scene 2, moving on, we cut to Lord Capulet's house in Paris, who is a relative of the prince. He visits Lord Capulet to inquire about marrying his daughter Juliet. Lord Capulet says that his daughter is too young. She's actually 13. She's not even 14 yet. And he wants his daughter to have a choice in who she marries. That's pretty progressive for this time period, and it's a positive check mark for Lord Capulet. Good thing. But anyway, he invites Paris to a party, an ancient feast that he's throwing, and he tells Paris to woo her, which means, try and get her attracted to you or seek her out and get her heart. So he says, come to the party, Paris, and, maybe she'll like you. Talk to her there. Capulet, there's an edit there, spelling error, my bad. Capulet sends a servant to invite guests, but the servant is illiterate. He can't read. And then the servant on the streets, he finds Benvolio and Romeo, who are still being emo. They're still talking about love. And he tells them that he can't read, so he asks if one of them can read the letter for him. And Romeo reads it. And when he's reading the guest list, he sees that Rosaline is on the guest list as the girl that he loves. She'll be at the party. So Benvolio hatches a plan, and his plan is they'll go to the party so that Romeo can see other girls and realize that by comparison, Rosaline is not that good looking. What Benvolio says, he says, compare her face with some that I shall show, and I will make thee think thy swan a crow. So he's basically saying Rosaline will look like a crow compared to all these beautiful swans at the party. So that's a little metaphor that he makes. Moving on to Act 1, this is Scene 3. Lady Capulet is another, we switch scenes. Lady Capulet goes to see Juliet to talk to her about marrying Paris, and she asks Juliet's nurse, which is basically Juliet's nanny and main confidant. They have a really strong relationship. Lady Capulet asks her to leave. This is private. But upon second thought, Lady Capulet realizes she has no idea how to talk to her own daughter. She's uncomfortable with Juliet being alone. She's uncomfortable being alone with Juliet. She calls the nurse back. And the nurse comes back. She tells some raunchy stories about when Juliet was a baby and fell on her back. And the nurse's dead husband said, oh, you'll be on your back when you're older. It's a lewd joke. And anyway, she also recounts the great relationship she has with Juliet. And she's realizing how old Juliet is now. And anyway, things are getting more and more awkward. But in the conversation, the nurse is mentioning something about how she's excited for the day that Juliet will get married. And then, sorry, another typo. And then Lady Capulet cuts in. She says, that's what I wanted to talk about, marriage. And so Lady Capulet tells Juliet she wants her to marry Paris. And she also mentions that there are girls Juliet's age, even younger, who are married and have kids. She also mentions herself, Lady Capulet, that she was Juliet's age when she had Juliet. Again, Juliet's only 14, not even 14, actually. I think there's an important thing to realize here that Lady Capulet's obviously a young mother. It's also important to notice that her expectations for Juliet might be sort of influenced by the fact that she had kids and was married so young. That's something that happens with parents and their kids today in terms of their relationships. Parents know what they went through and they might expect the same from their kids. That can be a dicey thing when parents maybe struggled through a certain thing that their kids don't struggle through, or parents did one thing one way and their kids aren't doing it. So I think that's a clear division with Lady Capulet and Juliet. And you can understand maybe both sides. The nurse says that Paris is a man of wax, aka he's so hot he's like a sculpture. And she thinks it's a great idea for Juliet to get married. Juliet doesn't commit to anything aside from talking to him at the feast. And Juliet in this moment, I think, is being pretty also progressive and strong-willed, at her age during this time. She has these expectations, being a girl from a family of some influence, to maybe follow what her parents say and to go through with an arranged marriage, but Juliet doesn't want to do that. And again, I think there's a stark difference between her and her mom. When we move forward, this is Scene 4, Act 1, Scene 4. Romeo and all his bros, including his cousin Benvolio and his good friend, who is a relative of the Prince Mercutio, they all have torches and masks, and they're heading towards the Capulet's house to attend the masquerade party. So it's a ball where people are going to be wearing masks and dancing. They're all making fun of each other. There's some banter. And Mercutio in particular is trolling Romeo. He's making fun of him for being sad and mopey. Romeo's still really upset about Rosaline. And Romeo says, "'Tis no wit to go to the party because he had a bad dream about it." So he's saying, it's not smart for us to go. I had a bad dream. And Mercutio replies, "I had a dream too." And he makes up this elaborate character named Queen Mab who visits people in their sleep and plays pranks on them. And he kind of says about Queen Mab, she makes like soldiers dream of killing and lovers dream of being in love. So he basically says, look, Romeo, you had a bad dream because you're not in a good mood. You're in a bad mood because your heart's broken. Like, no wonder why, you didn't have this pleasant dream. Anyway, Romeo during all this is saying, "Peace, peace," meaning be quiet, Mercutio. Thou talks of nothing. And very wittily, Mercutio says, "True, I talk of dreams." So he's basically saying that dreams are nothing. But Romeo disagrees. They all continue on in the party, and Romeo foreshadows his own death, and he says that he has a bad feeling about going to the party. Here are some of those lines. So after Romeo says, "Peace, peace, Mercutio, thou talkest of nothing," Mercutio says, "True, I talk of dreams, which are the children of an idle brain, begot of nothing but vain fantasy, which is as thin of substance as the air, and more inconstant than the wind." So he's saying that, dreams are the children of an idle brain, meaning when your brain is idle, it's not doing anything. You might just dream up or think bad things. And that's pretty true. If you're not busy, your mind might go to some bad places. And so Mercutio and Romeo have such starkly different outlooks. Romeo believes in fate and dreams, where Mercutio really doesn't. He sort of thinks that like fate is in our own hands, and just in general, he doesn't look into omens the way that Romeo does. Romeo, after all this, this is a really important section of lines here where they're all heading to the party, but Romeo really foreshadows his death. And he says, "I fear too early, for my mind misgives some consequence yet hanging in the stars shall bitterly begin his fearful date with this night's revels, and expire the term of despised life close to my breast by some vile forfeit of untimely death. But he that hath the steerage of my course direct my sail. On, lusty gentlemen." So he's saying that his mind is sort of telling him that there's a consequence, there's going to be a problem, and saying it's hanging in the stars. He's almost saying that it's fate, that he is going to end up dying because of these night's revels, which is like, the partying they're doing. The word expire means to end. So it says, "and expire the term of despised life close to my breast." He's talking about his own life will end up going away. Or you see the word, untimely death. He thinks he'll die at a young age, literally because he's going to this party. But he says, "He that hath the steerage of my course direct my sail." He's kind of talking to God there, or fate in a sense. It's almost like, hey, Jesus, take the wheel, like direct my sail. He's maybe comparing his life to like a ship, and he's not captaining it. He's basically saying, "He that hath the steerage," like whoever's controlling the steering wheel, all right, bring me forward. So it's an interesting, way to go about things, where Romeo just accepts whatever is going to happen and he goes on with it. And then